order. Will the clerk please call the roll at 7 o'clock?
Michael Rossi,
Here.
Alan Cravis.
Here.
Chris Anastovich.
Here.
Gary Muscang.
Here.
Mary Ellen Baldridge.
Here.
Michael Hughes. I know he's not here this evening. And Bethany Knight is not here. Andrew Richards.
Here.
Amandeep Singh.
Here.
Jeffrey Cashman is here but recusing himself. Adam Moore
Here.
and Patrick Sheehan.
Here.
I will seat Patrick and Adam. I'll put Adam for Michael Hughes and Patrick for Bethany. We have a quorum. The first item on the agenda tonight is SE 18-026, special exception application for 66 River Road, Porter's Farm under section 27.1.44C. Jeffrey and Patricia Cashman. Continued from last month. Is there any new correspondence here?
Yes. Veronica Lopez, 64 River Road, Cont, Connecticut, with the Planning and Zoning Commission. This letter is a follow-up to my comments at the last public hearing on September 1st, 2018. Both the Superior Court and the Appellate Court have ruled that the property at 66 River Road, Cont, Connecticut is not a farm. At this time, Mr. Cashman is in contempt for refusing to comply with the findings of these courts. He has now handed this issue to the Planning and Zoning Commission, which he is a member of, to decide this case. How fair is this? As I stated before, there was no farm there when my husband and I bought this property in 1989, and by his own account, he was awarded farm status in 1990, the year after we moved in. Mr. Cashman has 3.5 acres of land, but he wants you to believe he farms 300 acres. He does not plant, grow, or harvest any crops. What does he take to the market? Some chickens and eggs. This is not farming. The planning and zoning regs state that he can only have one large animal per acre, so many chickens and smaller animals. At one time, he had 6 to 7 steers, goats, and over 100 chickens, all on a quarter acre of land right up to my property line. Everything he sells, hay, straw, mulch, has to be imported from off-site. Mulching is not a natural part of his farming. He must truck in the wood chips, grind them 2 or more times, and dye them. He is not cutting down trees on his property to produce this. He may be a farm for the purpose of the tax credit, but he is not a working farm. On his 3.5 acre plot, he has a payloader, 2 semi-rigs, 3 tractor trailers, large dump truck, mason truck, flatbed trailers, box truck, horse trailer, his monster truck, large truck with bed filled with old tires, RV camper, plus other various vehicles. He is running out of room to park all these vehicles, that he is parking them along his north property line in his driveway. He also has various buildings and some hoop houses and 2 corn cribs, all for a non-working farm. Also, why would he be allowed to have farmer's license plate for his vehicles? And he has a homogeneous wood chip and mulch pile. At the last public hearing, only 3 people spoke in favor of approving the application, and they were the tree company owners because it's convenient for them to have some place to dump their wood chips and move on to the next job. Everyone else that spoke in favor said that it should be granted because Mr. Cashman is such a great guy and everyone loves him. There were 7 people from River Road present to oppose this, and 4 spoke up against it. Another opposed this via letter. No one living on River Road was there to support this. Between July and September, Mr. Cashman spent weeks cleaning up his property in preparation for inspections by the PZO in the subcommittee. He was moving around vehicles, moved junk off his property, and from the end of his driveway. He even cleaned up the manure in the coral along my property line. He never does this. Mr. Cashman also has a habit of burning leaves and brush on the ground and in trash barrels behind his house, and he leaves these fires burning unattended. At one time, the Cont PD came out and instructed him to put it out. Another time, he actually left his property with the fire still burning. The town crew was sent out to extinguish it. He had admitted to the animal control officer that he buries household trash along my property line, which in turn gets dragged and blown across my property. He claimed he has done this by accident. To this day, I am still finding trash on my property. Along with pushing mulch, wood chips, and tree rods onto my property, I've also found 4 tractor tires on my property that very similar to the ones he had thrown in the tractor. I found these a few years after my husband passed. In 2010, he planted a row of 10 to 15 trees in my backyard, approximately 10 feet from the true property line, and said that was the property line. In 2011, while I was at work, he mowed them all down. I asked him why. He stated that the deer had been eating them. Not true. A few months later, he built his corral and could not bring it all the way to where he planted trees because it would be right up against my garage. He even admitted doing this to Tom Lane. He also stated that he tried to move his mulching business to another location. He moved close to 200 loads of mulch to the Clinton salvage yard on Route 1. After the owner was issued a cease and desist order, he applied for a permit after the fact. The same thing Mr. Cashman is doing now. Since he began mulching, there is a stream of blackish-brown water flowing down his road, through the corral, into my yard, and down my driveway. 2 years ago, Mr. Cashman put down some mulch along the property line to prevent it from coming into my yard, but it's still there. His basement sump pump is also tied in directly to the catch basin in front of his home. Since Mr. Cashman mentioned that he had to call the authorities on me because I was trespassing, I feel I must now defend myself. Yes, I was taking pictures. No, I was not trespassing, and he was not even present. Other instances where he has harassed me are: A, the Clinton police came to my house one night because he claimed I had buried rocks in his mulch pile that could damage his equipment. The claim was never properly investigated. When I pressed the officer as to the size of these rocks, he replied, "I don't know, like the ones you have in your driveway." What I had in my driveway was pebbles, not rocks that could damage his equipment. B, he has threatened me twice. The second time as I was walking up my driveway, and he and his daughter were in the garage. He did this in the presence of 4 people. After the officers talked with Mr. Cashman, his wife told me that he was only venting and it was not directed at me. She was not present when this was happening. His daughter was trying to get him to be quiet, and if it was not directed at me, then why did he not yell at me? I get you, Ron. He shot that in the presence of his daughter, my neighbor's 6-year-old daughter, who was standing 3 feet from him. He also told the officer to expect more bogus complaints about me because he was in the process of suing me. He never sued me. C, when one of his steers became ill, instead of calling a vet, he called the police to speak with me and my neighbor, to ask if we might have poisoned him. I did not speak with the officer. D, an officer came to my home at night because Mr. Cashman was offended by a comment I made on a blog, and it had upset his daughter, and he just knew I was talking about him. I never mentioned any names in my comment. The officer told me to contact a criminal attorney because I could be arrested. An arrest warrant was sought to arrest me, but was rejected by the court. E, an officer came to my house because Mr. Cashman claimed I was harassing his family. I was not. In fact, it was his wife and daughter who had contacted me on 5 separate occasions. F, he has trespassed onto my property 4 times that I have seen. G, after strong winds knocked down a tree in my backyard and a portion of it fell in his backyard, he wanted the PZO to give me a bill for $850 to have it cut up and removed. PZO said he could not do that. Filed a bogus complaint against me with the PZO, stating that my property looked like a dump and I was bringing down the property value. After being inspected by the PZO, the only thing he could find was the paint on my garage door was peeling. I have to ask Mr. Cashman I have to ask if Mr. Cashman is getting preferential treatment from the committee and the PZO on this matter. He was granted a waiver from having a traffic study done based on 2 pictures he submitted, even though 4 people stated it was a safety hazard. The current PZO or the PZO committee could have not talked to anyone living on River Road to ask how this has impacted their lives. We spent 2 hours listening to people talk about what a great man Mr. Cashman is and how much they love him, and that is why the application should be approved. They did not talk about the issue itself. Mr. Cashman posted the wrong time of the hearing at the notice of his driveway. I notified the PZ about this on August 22nd. He was instructed to change the time and submit a picture. He didn't either. He's a member of the commission. He's the applicant on the issue, and yet he posted the wrong time. Everyone was present on time for the hearing except him, his daughter, and her FFA club. The town attorney decided to delay the meeting by a half hour. Barbara Knight stated it was time to end this because it was a black mark on the town and too much money has been spent on this matter. Imagine money that we will have to spend by the town on other lawsuits because of this. It sounded like she already made up her mind to approve this before hearing both sides. It seems like the agenda here by some members of this commission and the PZO is to give Mr. Cashman all the permits he needs, not so he can continue doing what he's been doing. Mr. Cashman stated that he has suffered a financial hardship because of this matter. He is not the only one. He is fighting to continue to run a manufacturing business in my backyard because it is cheaper, easier, and convenient. A business he has been running illegally for 10 years. I pay my state, federal, and town taxes each year, and I'm fighting for the right to enjoy my property anytime, day or night, without being harassed, being subjected to the noise, stench of animal manure, piles of wood chips, mulch, and biting flies. I have this right as much as any resident of Clinton. I invite the commission members and the PZO to my property so you can see what it looks like from my side of the car. I'll show you where he dumps the manure, not far from my property, lying in my backyard. Where he was buried trash, dumped wood chips, mulch, and logs on my property. Come see it from my perspective. We're on the buttons. Marty Fool, River Road, Clinton, Connecticut. To the Planning and Zoning Commission. My family lived at 33 River Road since 1957. My brother Jonathan and I used to play with all the children who lived on the river, Jamaica, and Warriors roads. We generally played at 64 River Road, my house, or at 37 River Road, the Rafters. The Redlands lived at 64 River Road next to Mr. Dotson at 66 River Road. Mr. Dotson had told us that we could play baseball in his land as long as we were careful. Mr. Dotson properties had two areas. One part was a junkyard, the other a field that was well maintained. He told us to stay away from the excavator, bulldozer, and 1959 Ford Thunderbird convertible in his backyard. Myself, my brother Jonathan, Stanley, Audrey Redmond, Jimmy, and Cindy Radford played there. Danny, David, Elmwood Davenport, Robert, Patty, Mary, Jean Hoffman, Danny Scott, Timmy, and Ken Whittinger also played there. The property stayed that way until the early 1970s when Mr. Dotson built his house. He had cleaned up his old junkyard and kept his property nice and clean. He had many huge tax sales, but kept no farm animals. I personally don't know where all of this false, ridiculous rumors came from, but there was no farm there on that property. Marty Gould. Town of Clinton, Mr. Michael Rossi, Chairman, Planning and Zoning Commission, 54 East Main Street, Clinton, Connecticut. Regarding SE-18-026, special exception for proposed farm under section 27.1.44. Jeffrey Cashman and Patricia Cashman. Dear Mr. Rossi, as a past member of the P&Z board, I know that you and all of the members have times when you are confronted with difficult decisions. I want to thank you and everyone for their continued service to our community. Clinton has a rich history in maritime pursuits, education, and farming. Today, more and more people are looking for local farm-to-table alternatives. Farming, when and where appropriate, should, in my opinion, be encouraged and fostered. Expanding urban areas have and can cause conflict. Making sure that the right zoning protection is adopted can afford both sides the best possible outcome. The following excerpt from an agricultural-based journal addresses some of the issues we face. In a 2004 National Law Center research article, quote, advocates of small farm viability are increasingly proposing market-driven state and local policy initiatives to counter the loss of farms at the urban edge due to rising land and input prices, falling commodity prices, and an overall deterioration of the rural communities. This is largely due to the low political priority in the agricultural sector of regulatory-based programs designed to stem farm loss. At the core of these initiatives is the proposal of legal, financial, technical, and moral support protections to direct farm marketing and other production diversification efforts such as direct niche marketing, i.e. organic produce or grass-fed beef, farmers markets, farm stands, and on-farm retail operations and recreational experiences. A common theme of these economic development efforts is the encouragement of local governments to exercise their zoning powers with increasing flexibility and restraint as they view farms and in aggregate farms communities, applications to diversify or otherwise change the nature of its traditional operation to take advantage of the economic opportunities offered by growing urban markets. In the quest for new avenues to farm profitability, however, the ends may not justify the means when facing local zoning authorities. Best regards, Michael Newsom. In reference to zoning board hearing on the Cashman property, I am concerned about the application for Cashmans to continue their operations for a farm. I don't understand why wood chips for mulch has anything to do with the farm. The high pile of chips on at least half of this property is a fire hazard. In the AM, you can see steam coming out of it. I really don't think it should be part of this farm. I request that all members of the zoning board go unannounced to check the entire property out. I live across the street from Cashman and Lopez property. Thank you, Shirley E. Radford.
Thank you very much. testimony. Okay, is there an agent or applicant
Yes.
here today? Do you have materials for us?
I do. Do we have an easel tonight as well? I don't see one. While we're doing that, I can hand out a few things here. Great. I'll put it on the table. I get it. All right. Attorney Edward Casella representing Jeffrey Cashman.
We're going to speak up there.
Yeah. You can pass these out. I'll start putting these one together. This is a letter with updated statement of use, and there's an updated site plan as well. Yeah. Okay. Right here. Yeah, she's not here. Bethany Knight's not here.
Okay.
So, we can,
We need some of I don't think we had, you grabbed some of the site plans before everybody over there got some.
how many more do we need?
Do you want to?
Thanks, sir.
We need one. One more. Okay. Did everybody get those two handout?
Yep.
I know we're just talking so the date doesn't stop.
You're saying
We ready?
Yep.
Okay. Again, I'm attorney Ed Casella representing Jeffrey and Patricia Cashman regarding this application. We handed out a letter with an updated site plan, updated statement of use, and some additional photographs of the property that were taken out there recently, depicting some areas of the site, in particular the northern portion, the northeastern portion, which is the mulch composting work production area. So if I can, I'll just run you through what we've submitted, and then we can further discuss any specific questions that you have, respond to the letters, and move this application process forward. So at the hearing in September, the question was asked to provide a site plan with more specific detail and dimension with respect to property lines, buffers, and trying to define more specifically, in particular, the mulch and composting work area that's on the top of the hill for the Cashman property. And so there's a couple of key things on the site plan that are applicable to this discussion. The first is, off of the property lines, for the mulch composting area, there needs to be a 35-foot setback area that is off of the, in this instance, the northern property line and the southern property line, which are the most applicable. There's no contention that the property line heading toward what's shown as Love Day to the top of the map, or obviously down toward River Road, So the two side setbacks have been shown, and those are dashed lines on this plan that come around up to the top and come back down toward River Road. And inside of those 35-foot setbacks, there's a required 25-foot vegetative buffer. On the north side, adjacent to Hathaway, Whitaker, LaFlame, there's an existing buffer of 28 feet. Okay, with one exception, there's a small area where the gravel driveway encroaches in. And so that one of the items on the site plan is that vegetation will need to be added to that portion of the area in order to ensure compliance, as shown on its site plan, as shown on the site plan. And on the south side, adjacent to the Creaser property, which is Mrs. Lopez's property, the vegetative buffer is currently 38 feet, and that includes the landscape, that includes the berm which is on that property. We showed photographs of it at the last hearing. And new arborvitaes have been planted, and that wood chip berm has been seeded and hayed so that it will encourage additional vegetation to grow. So to help illustrate what is happening at the top of the site, we've provided some photographs. We can work through the photographs with the site plan to give you a little bit better idea of some of the existing conditions. So the first property is kind of a general overview. Dimension, standing on the western boundary line where the gravel drive comes up. You can see the gravel drive going down the hill here toward the white buildings is this gravel drive as it comes down. And then obviously this is the mulch pile, which is in the middle. And you can see on the far side the vegetation, the arborvitaes that have been planted at the top along with the hay that's gone along with the seeding of this wood chip pile. This is the scope of the mulch compost work area is 11,625 square feet, which we measured, met the Torrance Downs out on the site, measured it, and showed him that it was in compliance with what we provided on the site plan. The next photograph, if you turn, this photograph is standing up toward the northern portion of the property, looking down the southernmost berm where the new arborvitae are planted, and you can see the new arborvitae that have been planted at the top. So you can see the rear side of this existing wood chip berm is vegetated by natural vegetation, and then the front side has been graded, has been topped off with additional grasses to promote more vegetation. One of the concepts is the berm that surrounds the property will no longer be utilized and added to. It'll be allowed to vegetate in its natural state to ensure that it greens up and provides really a natural landscape fence, so to speak, that surrounds this work production area on the north, or the east, toward the top of the map, the south, and the west, back toward the gravel drive. Again, this is just a photograph now looking from, now looking up toward the top of the map, and again, you can see the arborvitaes, you can see the hay that's been done, you can see it was seeded, and again, you can see the rear of the wood chip berm has already established vegetation on it. This photograph is in part looking back toward the Whitaker property and the Hathaway property. And this shows the dimension from the property line, the dimension 38 to 40 feet to the toe of this berm here. And the last photograph is what the east side, where I mentioned there needs to be a little additional vegetation added. The east side looking down toward the block garage. Standing up here looking down toward the block garage, and you can see the gravel is 28 feet, but then it slightly encroaches, the gravel area slightly encroaches into the required 25-foot buffer. This is a driveway to get back and forth to the to this northernmost portion of the property. Next picture. This is just showing what the wood chip berm looked like on the next to the Lopez property before it was paved, and you can see the extent of the vegetation that's on the rear side of the berm. And this is the last photo here. This one is what the south side of the berm where the gravel drive comes up into this area is. So you can see the extent of the vegetation as it's been allowed to grow over the course of many years on this hill. So that's essentially right here. Gravel drive in between the storage bins and the work area. So that's what it looks like when it's allowed to grow. And again, the landscaping berms, there will be no more material added to them, and they'll be allowed to vegetate. So that is just a kind of a photographic overview of what's existing on the site now, in addition to what's shown on the site plan, which has been measured and verified out on the property. The statement of use has been updated as well for a couple of things that I just want to point out. First of all, the delivery of materials, which is in B number 2. The hours for deliveries have been changed to be 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And delivery trucks, if there's trucks coming in, we heard testimony last time how tree trucks could be staged on River Road. There's adequate room for staging on the site, so the tree companies will be instructed not to stage on River Road. Additionally, on the site plan itself, there are sedimentation and erosion control notes. I'll run through them. Number 1, no new construction is proposed. So it's essentially working within the existing confines of the site as it's utilized. Number 2, the mulch compost pile, which is the work pile, the material pile, to be monitored to ensure that there's no erosion of material. I was out on the property with Mr. Downs at the end of last week after several pretty substantial rains, and the pile itself does not erode. It remains constant, and in the event it becomes necessary, silt fence could be installed along the southwest portion, which is heading toward the gravel drive, but I think you'll hear that silt fence is not necessary. The landscape berm should be seeded and hayed in areas without stabilizing vegetation. Again, the conditions kind of speak for themselves, where you can see there's a clear delineation on the photographs between the berms and the material pile and the gravel drive. If there was erosion of material onto the gravel drive, you would see it from these photographs. There isn't. They stay together. The gravel drive is to remain pervious, so nothing up there is going to be paved, and it needs to be graded to drain, and it's on the map, so that the water, again, a lot of it you can see stays on right where it was and infiltrates into the ground there. Some of it circles around the bins and comes back into the central portion of the property adjacent to the house, and then it disperses from there. There's actually a collection area under the chicken coops where there's a drained sump pit that Mr. Cashman actually utilizes to irrigate the front portion of his property. We talked about the existing drainage patterns are to remain. When we were on site, in the area where the agricultural well is on the site plan, the driveway needs to be elevated. It was Torrance's conclusion, and we agreed to elevate that area to ensure that nothing is draining onto the Lopez property to the south, that it can make the corner around where the shed is, the 16 by 24 foot shed is on the property. It does it now, but in the case of a heavier rain, it could go. The erosion control point of contact is listed on the plan. We talked about some of the specific landscaping that was being done, but there's notes added to the plan. New plantings on the southern landscape berm to be watered and maintained. Those are the arborvitaes. Those are the seeded grasses, the annual the annual rye and the winter rye that have been planted. Those need to be seeded and maintained so that they establish and grow and serve the purpose for which they're there, which is a vegetative buffer. On the northern portion of the site that we talked about, small portion of the gravel driveway needs to be removed to ensure that there's a minimum 25-foot landscape buffer. So those are the additions to the site plan. We've done a calculation of the amount of area for the mulch compost production and storage, 13,425 square feet, which is less than the 15,000 that's allowed under the regulations. Do you have any questions on the site plan or on the revised statement of use? We can obviously answer them at a later time too, but before I go into kind of the next points, I figured it would be helpful to keep on track here.
I just had one, on one of the pictures, you have a yellow line that I don't see what it goes to. No? This picture?
Contour of the
Oh, sure, yeah. The grade in this area, I think this is meant to depict the grade.
Okay.
The adjacent properties here are at a higher elevation. One of the questions is there a potential for stormwater, sedimentation, erosion to come off of this property and go on to adjacent? When you're out there and trying to depict it on this photograph, the other properties are actually higher. So again, our position is that from a stormwater perspective, the property has essentially been improved to what it's proposed to be improved with some of these minor modifications that we spelled out more clearly on the plan, and that there isn't going to be or hasn't been any impact on the adjacent property owners to the north or to the south or out to River Road. And I think the recent rainfalls that we've had just demonstrate that. That if there's water coming off the site in these huge 2, 3, 4 inch rains that we've had, it's clear water. It's not sediment that's eroding from somewhere. It doesn't include any wood chips or any other materials that are coming off. It's just water that, like everybody else's properties over the last couple of weeks, water leaves properties and goes on to public roads. The question is whether it's clear, and it is.
Mr. Chairman, I had a question. May I address?
Yes.
For the record, could you clarify who it is who prepared this revised site plan? Was it prepared by a licensed surveyor?
It was not.
Okay, can you clarify?
It was prepared by Jeffrey Cashman and myself.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anybody,
Obviously, if you have more questions, we can answer them.
anybody mind if we go to testimony first, or
I have a few more things,
we do?
if I can.
I just have one question. Do you have anything to, for the erosion of tannins out of the wood chips in your plant?
Erosion of tannins.
Correct.
I don't, maybe Jeff can answer that more specifically, if there is any erosion of tannins out of the wood chips.
Other than just fine particles of what normally come out of mulch when you're
Tannins are
planting. No.
Tannins are not particles. They're, the best example I can give is like teeth.
Sure.
highly toxic to, in large quantities to water sources. So
Okay.
I personally would like, right now we're saying it goes into the chicken coop.
Well, no, the wood chip pile is here, so to speak. And water that comes off the pile, and again, that doesn't go straight into the ground, because obviously it's, the wood chip pile in and of itself is impervious. It collects water, but any water that's up here drains in a gravel driveway. Plans say it's got to remain gravel, so it has an impervious nature. It comes here, around the corner. Some of it disperses directly into this hillside. Around here into more gravel area at the center of the site. If it hasn't dispersed at this point, then water, and we don't know if the water that goes from here is from up here, or if it's from here, or if it's from over there. It's water that the whole site collects. Doesn't go on to adjacent property owners. It's, for the most part, except in these tremendous rains, stays on site. And you can see evidence of the water moving from the inspection that we had in the rain out there last week.
I guess my concern is there a way to capture this water so that it doesn't go out onto River Road and into the Ammonoosuc River?
During what rain event?
Well, let's pick the last one.
Which, Friday?
Right. Or
It wasn't going off the site on Friday. There was no water going off the site on Friday, I think. That's.
Is this all your, Jeff's opinion, or is there engineering?
There's no
statement
engineering.
to back that up?
Yeah. It's based upon,
Your opinion?
yeah, in our observations, thank you. That's the word it was. Okay, a couple more things. We heard Mrs. Lopez's letter, and I think Jeff wants to speak a little bit to the history. We were trying not to get into the history, but a lot of history was brought up today. The key facts for you all to consider is, this is a parcel of land with more than 3 acres, so under your zoning regulations, it's allowed to be a farm, subject to this approval, okay? Number 2, the operation, that's the production of mulch compost at the top of the property, is allowed as an agricultural use under your regulations. The keeping of livestock is allowed as an agricultural use under your regulations. Although some neighbors may not like it, there's obviously a lot of bad blood, there's a lot of history of tension. We're not here today for that. We're here to discuss with you this application as it relates to the zoning regulations. What we're proposing here in the statement of use on the plan is all allowed. It's allowed subject to special permit, with the criteria being, is it in harmony with the neighborhood? Does it impair adjacent property values? Does it affect emergency access? Present undue fire damage? So again, and I'm going to let Jeff speak to some of the history, but these properties have been used historically for many years for the keeping of animals right up to property lines, okay, including the property next door, the preserve property, including the property across the street, Ratner property. This property is a 3-acre parcel. It's allowed to be a farm. So emergency access, the regulations provide that there's got to be 25-foot minimum to get to this pile. There's a 25-foot minimum on 3 sides of it to be able to allow for that. So our position is that this will not have any impact on, it is in harmony because it's a 3-acre parcel in residential land, and it won't have any impact on property values because this property has been used this way or in a very similar way for many, many, many years. So Jeff, do you want to go through some of those pictures are in, we have a packet with many of those pictures in, so.
Photos don't lie, folks. These are some dated photographs of our property that show our livestock use that are dated. If you look at the back of the pictures, these
River Road and Veronica Lopez's driveway. This is our use of our barn. The last public hearing, I spoke that Veronica Lopez's property had animals on when she bought it. This shows the building and the enclosure and the fences that were in her backyard. The photograph is behind my barn. This shows
We should, hold on, we should somehow label these photographs as you're talking.
this is an aerial.
Hold on, let's start over with the first one that you mentioned.
Attorney Casella, I'm going to enter an objection here because I don't understand how pictures of my client's property, excuse me, Attorney Timothy Shields for the record, have anything to do with the application.
We just heard a 20-minute letter regarding the history of the property and the utilization of the land. Again, we'll be brief on this, but I think we have the ability to at least provide a little bit of backdrop.
But I believe that letter was addressed to the use of the Cashman property, which is the subject of the application.
Yeah, it is.
It is subject to the application. It sure is.
Stop.
We're not,
But these
I don't
are
want back
property,
and
these are
forth.
pictures that show the Cashman property and the Lopez property and their relationship to each other, and in particular, the use of the land on the Cashman property that's right next to the Lopez property.
you should limit it to what's on your property.
Yeah, that's fine.
It is. This is a photograph that was taken on my property.
Show it on the photograph where, Jeff, take a breath.
Yeah.
Where is your property line in relationship to the
This
Lopez
fence is the
property?
property line right here. This is our horse at the time, and that's my barn. Right here. That's a picture of me being on my property.
Where is that photo in relation to the site plan?
Into the site plan, it is
Go show.
from here. Me standing right here by the barn. The corner of that picture of that barn right there is this corner of that barn right there. The horse is behind the barn, and the fence that's shown by that horse is right there along the property line between the Creaser property at the time.
I label that photo A.
This is a piece of my property also, onto River Road. Shows the sheep, the goats.
Hold on. Photo B shows the corner of your property.
What year is that?
This is 1990.
Here, let them
This
have the
photograph here is taken in front of this piece of property here on River Road, right here. Shows the corral all the way down to the private property.
Chairman, I'd like your clarification on,
Go ahead.
okay. I'd like to know what the authority is that they're using to establish the dates of these photographs.
On the back of the pictures,
But I mean, how did they get there, what's? how
when
did
they
you
developed
get
the
there?
film, they're dated
Okay, so.
on the back of the picture.
So
I
it
date
could,
all our pictures.
I'm sorry,
I date all our pictures, I'm right here.
And
Dated
say your
from the
name.
printer, when they're printed and when they're developed.
okay, so this is a date of printing, Del Valle.
Yes.
Thank you.
This is that same area. It now shows the several greenhouses that are on the property.
Starting down here, we'll consider that one.
Yeah.
Just like Thanksgiving.
This is a picture of seedlings that came into the greenhouses.
Don't worry about greenhouses.
Yeah.
Where is the photo of the horse taken?
This is taken in front of the barn right here, which was a fence line right here with on this side of the barn towards River Road. Faces that direction.
For reference, is Mrs. Lopez property shown in this photograph?
Unfortunately, it is, yes.
Okay, but that's her garage there. That's her house next to it.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask what we're trying to ascertain here?
Yeah.
The agricultural use and through its years.
By,
Mrs. Lopez has made false statements tonight that we haven't had an agricultural use on the property. And these show greenhouse uses, they show farm animal uses, they show every bit of everything through the years that we've been out on River Road. And if you like, maybe 50 or 75 more are there.
No.
so my question is, starting when? When am I supposed to be looking at?
If you look at the back of the picture, it's 1990
Jeff,
since we've
let
been
him
here.
ask his question.
So, of course, you know, if you took one, jerk here. If you took one today, right, it would show agricultural use. This one says 1991. What year would you like us to start
Well, I think the
contemplating?
question is, as you're determining the special permit application, does this impair the value of the neighbor's property, or is it in harmony with the neighborhood, right? Those are two of the criteria. So if a property's been utilized in a certain way for 28 years, it's hard to say continuing it in that manner is going to not be in harmony or impair neighboring property owners. That's, I think, the point we're trying to get to. And that's for you guys to decide. But we heard a lot of testimony today in the form of a letter that there was no valid agricultural use or it was illegal, etc. And our position is, no, it wasn't. There was no zoning regulating agricultural uses prior to 2011. You were able to operate a farm without a permit, all caps, under your zoning regulations. And that's what was happening on this property. So to come now and say a farm impacts my property, impairs my value, is not in harmony with the regulations, I think is a stretch, and that's what we're asking you to decide, and we're just trying to provide you a little bit of background to support that conclusion. So, we have, there was additional letters that were submitted. I don't know if they went by email, but I have copies of them. Do you want me to read them? I have copies for everybody, but I would offer to read them.
How long are they?
They're not too long. Oh, this is a whole set. I'm sorry, I only gave you one. I think there's 5 letters. Thank you.
Would you object if the commissioners read them to themselves?
No. All of them? All right, apparently we would object.
Okay.
So would you like me to read them?
Yes.
Okay. First letter is from Ron Cooper, forwarded an email that he sent, and I don't know if Rossi Clinton PZC is a valid email address, so that's why I asked him to forward it to me. I'm writing this letter to you in support of the Cashman family living at 66 River Road. I've known Jeff and Patty since I moved into the neighborhood back in April '92. At that time, I knew that their property was a farm and had no objections to it since it was part of the charm that I was looking for, casual country. Jeff has cows and chickens across the street, while I have one adjacent neighbor with horses and one neighbor with a mill shop. I hear all of them daily doing what they love to do, enjoying life and not bothering anyone. Whether it's a saw, a rooster, or horses neighing, they all bring a smile to my face because I know that we're all living there for a reason. We love the area. There are no manicured lawns, yards are not perfect, houses are in various states of disrepair, but it's where we want to live. It's perfect. Jeff is probably one of the hardest working people I know. He can't stop doing things or fixing things. That's another thing I like about the area. Neighbors that I can turn to for help. Likewise, I know that if they need help, they can in turn come to me for the same. This is the inherent trust we all have in our neighborhood. Quite assurance of help. And Jeff excels at this feeling. I also know that Jeff is very active in civic endeavors. This is how important Jeff is to the area. He makes up for the shortcoming of other folks. He understands the needs of people and how important it is to reach out and do unto others. I would hope that the town of Clinton would understand this and embrace this for all their communities. This would start by being a little more emphatic and understanding when it comes to the interpretation and execution of their, mine too, zoning regulations. I'm a little lost on how a neighborhood can have cows, horses, and a mill shop, and then the house get selected as non-conforming. Then there's the campground just up the road, which brings in all extra traffic and cuts down my internet bandwidth. But I guess that's another issue altogether. All I'm requesting is that the town be fair in selectivity of rules and zoning restrictions. Additionally, I might add that if there are any outstanding fines or penalties, they will be waived as a gesture of the good faith I am hoping the town officials have. Public trust is at a premium in these very shaky political times, and knowing when to use discretion is an attribute all of us can brush up on. We shouldn't need a lawyer just to live and get along in today's age, especially in the small town Clinton. Thank you very much for your consideration. Best to you, Ronald Cooper, 41 River Road. Jeff, where does Mr. Cooper live in relation to your house?
Directly across the street.
Okay. Next letter is shorter. From John and Bonnie Fillion, dated September 10th, whose address is 25C River Road, Clinton, Connecticut, 06413. Planning Zoning Commission, dear members, Jeff and Patty Cashman have lived and operated Sprucey Hill Farm since before we built our River Road home in 1989. Please issue a special exception allowing the Cashmans to continue running their farm business for the following reasons. The Cashmans have lived in and operated their River Road farm for over 30 years, while other neighbors have come and gone, growing crops, raising livestock, creating, distributing wood mulch, have never interfered with the peaceful enjoyment of our River Road home. The farm is not noisy, and Jeff's mulch deliveries do not impose an added burden to our street. Remember, our country road has a campground a half mile, I bet, from Sprucey Hill, where large RVs are regularly traveling to and from Route 95. The farm is a large part of the Cashman's livelihood. Public water is available on River Road. The availability of public water should alleviate concerns of well water contamination and the need for new fencing setbacks. New zoning requirements will need to be applied unilaterally on other River Road residents who raise vegetables, horses, chickens, peacocks, dogs, etc. Part of the charm of our neighborhood is the farm stands, grazing horses, chicken coops, bird sanctuaries, campgrounds, and other natural activities found in rural areas. The Cashman property shows ownership pride and has always been well maintained. Jeff Cashman has been the best kind of neighbor who is always available to lend a hand to help a neighbor. Rather than trying to shut him down, we should want to keep him as a member of our community. See the attached Facebook post from February 2013, which is a picture of a payloader plowing snow with Jeff Cashman. Thank you for being our neighbor. Next letter, I'm going to... Did you read the Michael Knutson letter already?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's in the record. We'll flip to the Catherine Fillion. 29 River Road. Dear members, I have lived at 29 River Road for over 50 years. In that time, I have seen many changes, including Fox Hill being completed and many homes being constructed. I have walked, driven by, and observed property Jeff Cashman now owns. In the time since he has owned the property, he has done nothing but improve it. It is a joy to walk by and see the country atmosphere being sustained. Jeff has also been a good neighbor these past years, helping out in storms, clearing driveways, and being available when called on. I see no reason why his maintenance of the property is anything but adequate, and cannot for the life of me think why now, after all these years, the town would want to make changes to this property. However, after looking at some of the other properties around, I can see changes that I think would benefit the neighborhood. 3 more. Jessica Hart, email, dated August 28th, 2018. My name is Jessica Hart. I'm 17 years old from Middletown, Connecticut, and I support Sprucey Hill Farms application. Quote, learning to do, doing to learn, earning to live, living to serve. That's the FFA motto, a statement that directs the teaching style of agricultural education all over the country. I'm a Mattabasset FFA chapter president for the Middletown Agricultural Science and Technology Center at Middletown High School, a past Connecticut FFA District 3 president, and I will always be a proud advocate for agriculture and agricultural education. If you ask me, the FFA motto describes the best way to grow. First, an instructor teaches real-life applicable skills to students. Student practices skills hands-on, learning along the way through their mistakes and teachable moments. These skills are then built into a career that generates honest wealth to support the student. Finally, the student is able to then turn his skills around and use them to the betterment of society by serving others. This is the teaching style that grows over 600,000 agricultural students and FFA members nationwide into educated, passionate future agriculturalists. It is to the credit of the FFA and agricultural education that the USA is blessed with the world's safest, most abundant food supply, but we are in no position to become complacent with our system. By the year 5050, we agriculturalists must double the food production to meet the needs of our planet population, all while streamlining our practices to reduce agricultural's carbon footprint and use resources as wisely as we can. Agricultural science, agricultural technology, and agricultural education are key pieces of the puzzle that will carry us into the future of efficient food production. Agricultural education, as stated in the FFA motto, places a great importance on hands-on learning. These experiences don't come from any school classroom. As my teacher always said, the best classrooms smell like a barn. That's because the best classroom is a barn. I'm emailing you today urging you to protect Sprucey Hill Farm. The farm has been hugely impactful on the quality of agricultural education at our school. The farm fits seamlessly into curriculum taught at the high school and contributes to FFA motto by embodying principles stated. Learning to do is demonstrated by Sprucey Hill Farm because of the farm's partnership with Middletown High School. Students involved with the farm learn skills in the classroom and then apply when they on the farm. Similarly, students involved in Sprucey Hill get the chance to share experiences with other students who work on farm and have other pursuits, which enriches the classroom experience. Sprucey Hill Farm gives students more opportunities to fulfill the second motto, doing to learn, by giving students opportunities to work on the farm as supervised agricultural experience. All students nationwide are required to complete hours of this experience at our program at the school. In order for an agricultural student to graduate, they must have accumulated 545 hours of the experience. Our program has students who have the experience that are competitive on the state level for the best experiences in diversified agricultural production. Students also get a chance to practice entrepreneurial skills through Sprucey Hill Farm, thus giving them the chance to practice, quote, earning to live. Students sell eggs at farmers market. Finally, Sprucey Hill's rabbit breeding program has worked alongside the Mattabasset FFA, Middletown High students, staff, and those registered as pet partners. Therapy for animal handlers since 2015. The friendly social rabbits produced by Sprucey Hill Farm have made wonderful therapy animals that have brought joy to many members of the community and beyond. In this way, Sprucey Hill Farm gives students a way to, quote, live to serve, a way to give back to the community and leave the world better than it was before. She's a recent graduate of Middletown High School in her agricultural program. She's witnessed shy, timid freshmen transform into confident leaders. The farm has complemented and enriched their program, giving many opportunities. Animal science class has consistently been ranked as the top animal science program in the state, as indicated by student test scores. There's no question that the program's success is in part from what they get from local farms such as Sprucey Hill. Please consider the great impact Sprucey Hill Farm has on the town and community, and I know they are very involved and participate in parades and such in Clinton. I urge you to think bigger than Clinton, because Sprucey Hill affects more than just Clinton. Its connection with Middletown's Agricultural Center, Mattabasset FFA, directly contributes to the quality of agricultural education in Middlesex County. Sprucey Hill Farm's impact on agricultural education will have a role in equipping the next generation of agriculturalists with knowledge and skills to meet the challenges of agriculture in the future. Two more, briefer. Courtney Rudnick addressed, Dear Mr. Commissioner, my name is Courtney Rudnick, I live in East Hampton, and I'm in favor of the application for 66 River Road because I go to school with Heather. We are both involved in an agricultural science program, VOAG. Heather works very hard on the farm and aspires to be a veterinarian when she's older. The agricultural program that we attend helps us go through the process of learning to do, which means that we work at an agricultural site that helps us learn about what agriculture is really about. Without farms like this, kids today would not know what hard work is and how agriculture works. I truly believe in the hard work that this family puts in their farm and love that it benefits our chapter and everyone else surrounding it. By working on their farm until late at night, feeding and looking after their animals, the Cashmans are able to show in real life what it takes to be the person providing every meal to you. Today, in 2018, it is not very common anymore to live on a farm because we go to a grocery store, easily buy a carton of milk or vegetables. No one realizes what work goes into raising cows for beef and dairy production. If we did not have farms like this, our food amount would be very scarce. This is another reason why I favor the application for 66 River Road. They are an asset to the community of Clinton and the surrounding communities. They reach through the local FFA program. Please vote to reinstate their farm status and allow them to continue to impact lives like mine. Once in a while you need a doctor, a lawyer, but 3 times a day you need a farmer. Thank you. Respectfully submitted, Courtney Rudnick, East Hampton. Last letter. Dear Mr. Commissioner, from Isabella Scarfo, also from East Hampton, Connecticut, in favor of the application concerning 66 River Road. Over the last few years, Sprucey Hill Farm has impacted my agricultural knowledge a lot. I have learned a lot of new skills from this farm, some of those being public speaking skills, actual hand-eye coordination, having time management, having personal skills to bring to the real world. I've always thought that farming work wasn't as useful as other skills, but it is one of the most important things that this world has to offer, and if it weren't for the Cashmans and their hard work and dedication, I wouldn't be the person I've become. Those people and the farm they run have given me a chance at another family, and they have pushed me to be the best I can be. I got to be the vice president of the Mattabesset FBA because of them, and because they never let me quit, even when it's 99 degrees out, and we had to clean chicken coops and manure. I urge you not to hinder them from being able to use what they've been given and what they continue to give students and community members all over the state. Tonight, vote yes and preserve that legacy. One final thing, unless there's a question.
One of the letters was from Catherine Fillion of 29 River Road, another is from John and Bonnie Fillion of 25C River Road. Can you clarify whether there's any known relationship between the two Fillion authors?
Fillions, are they related?
Yeah, one is son and daughter-in-law, and one is the mom.
Thank you.
Who's who?
One letter has 2 signatories. So.
Right, the one with the one signature is the mom, and she sold property to her daughter.
And where do they live in relation to your property?
They live down the road about less than a quarter of a mile.
Okay. One of the issues that I would like to put on the forefront of our discussion tonight is the question regarding the Commission's interpretation of the word enclosure. And this has a bearing on the site plan because we have the livestock area going up to the property line. So I presented it in my initial application materials to you. You've heard from Mr. Slater regarding his framing of the question for you all. I'm not going to rehash it because I think we've kind of gone through it already. Our position is that the word enclosure, as it appears in the regulations relating to livestock in section 28, does not include fenced-in areas. It only includes buildings, structures, and other type of structures, more or less, that could keep an animal, whether it's a movable item or not. That part of the reason why we believe that interpretation is accurate, because you Planning and Zoning Commission in a previous version of the regulations, and we highlighted this in the materials that we provided to you, had a definition of building in 2004, which were the operative regulations prior to the most recent change, which impacted farm, has a definition of building which includes that's intended for shelter, support, or enclosure of persons, animal, or property of any kind. So there you have a consistent definition, consistent use of the word enclosure, meaning a building or some other structure that actually encloses and doesn't spatially enclose like a fence would be. And additionally, fences, unless they're over 6 feet, are not regulated. So having an interpretation, that's our opinion, that having an interpretation that a fenced area keeping animals is an enclosure is not consistent, that fences typically don't need to meet setbacks. Okay, and again, I know you've gotten other advice from your counsel. I think the most important thing, especially for this evening's discussion, similar to the waivers, this is something we'd like a chance to address in the event that your interpretation is different from ours. So I don't know if we can call on the commission to make a determination, whether it's tonight, the next meeting, whenever it's appropriate, perhaps while the public hearing is still open, regarding your determination. You have the operative interpretation of your own regulations. You're the body that is supposed to make this decision. So knowing if this site plan meets your interpretation, I think we would like to know before the public hearing closes, because if it doesn't, we'd like the opportunity to at least modify it, potentially. So that we're asking you if you can make that determination before closing the public hearing at the appropriate time. And I think that's it. Oh, you want to? Yeah, you have it ready? We have one more to go along with the photographs. This is very brief. There's just a video again, and this is, Jeff can tell you when it's dated and show it to you, and we can email it so that you all have a copy of the record.
Other than
What
the
year is this? What year is this?
1990. Other than the Mr. Rossi, you can see if you're viewing it by yourself, you can pass it on the laptop afterwards. This is sheep sharing that we had in 1990. There was about 8 or 9 goats on the property and some sheep that we had. There's some horses, you can see pictures of livestock. We also brought the sign in that was original sign that my dad made when we bought the property in 1987. Very clearly it says nursery-farm. The property was both intent to have nursery and farm, both, and those were actually something that we worked with your land use office before. So the video is self-explanatory if you want to pass it. Okay.
If you want to, Heather, if you want to just restart it, show it to groups of people, I think that would be ideal.
So, just to summarize, the point that you're trying to make is that you had animals in 1990.
Yeah, it's very, very clear, and the commission is very clear that there's been some comments made by a neighbor that there's been no animals when she moved into the property. It's very clear through the video, through the pictures, that there's been a historical use of animals on the property. That was my point that I wanted to make. Okay, I'm not being rude, I'm refuting the letter that's next door, and most of this, I won't even address some of the other comments because they're just so not valid at all. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, can we clarify what year the testimony was that she moved in and there was no animals? She's stating that there's no animals on the property. And what year Mr. Cashman is claiming that there was animals?
It was 1989.
You spoke up, so can I have you say your name for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry, Veronica Wolfers. I live at 64 River Road.
Thank you.
And just to make it easy, Mr. Chairman, can you ask the applicant what year he is stating that he had animals on the property? That he has evidence of?
Did you have evidence?
There was, that I have evidence of?
The photographs.
The photograph in 1987, I believe, is there, where it shows we've had animals there from the beginning.
Let's take a look at those photos just to clarify.
That would be photo A, right?
Let me show them to him.
So, Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, this is a video of a video.
Yes, it is. Yeah. It's because it was a VHS we didn't have.
Yep, that's fine.
I got nothing to play that old, you know?
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, so absolutely, and again, just to keep this all, I have no doubt that somebody's shearing a sheep. A sheep? I don't know how I would know, how do we know, you know, can anybody point out anything in the video that would put it to the applicant's farm?
Yeah, I've got a photograph that's dated that goes right along with it here. That's dated on the back.
In the video, can't you see someone else's property too as a landmark?
Pardon me?
Wait. If you have a photograph,
Those are the ones from before.
Yeah, this is dated right here, back of the photograph. Dated. This now shows the barn and the enclosure, and it shows when you actually look down through the property, it shows the fence line comes down. Matter of fact, it's really wonderful because it shows the barbed wire fence on the property it was when we bought the property, which is now
We need to
dated
keep
also
those.
on the print, which is 19, right here, 85, 86. Okay, the barbed wire fence shows right on that property, right there on an 86, certified. Okay.
Okay. At this time, I would like to start taking testimony from the audience. We traditionally take testimony first from those in favor of the application, and those in opposition, and then those with general comments. I would like to ask if you've testified before, or if you've presented us with a letter, that you not repeat what you've already said. And if you've testified before, that you not speak until everybody else has had an opportunity to do so. Okay? With that, we'll take testimony from anyone who is in favor of this application, who hasn't presented before. Anybody who's in opposition to this application who hasn't presented before? Yeah. Let me see if there, I don't want to rehash what was already said. We don't want to repeat the same testimony. So if you have something new, then please, you're welcome to come up.
Well, I have concerns about traffic on that one.
Well, come up and we ask that you sign in and state your name and address for the record. I know somebody else had signed in also.
Kristen and Matt.
She raised her hand. Okay, and can you please make sure you speak up? We are recording this as required by the state.
Well, my comment is in regards to the commercial business.
Name and address, please, for me. Can you state your name and address?
Mary Wozniak, 39 River Road.
Thank you.
My comments are in regards to the commercial business on 66 River Road. My major concerns are regarding the tree contractor trucks with the attached chipping apparatus on River Road. It's narrow, it's windy, it's a secondary road and very populated residential area. Don't forget, this is a residential area. As I stated, there's no place for these tree companies to dump their wood chips, so therefore, if it's open, they're all going to go up to 66 River Road, and they'll be all lined up. That's a lot of trucks. I've seen trucks from Middlesex up there too. I think it's a road hazard, and I'm recommending that a traffic study be done on this road.
We've got mobile homes going down the road at the campgrounds, and there's school buses. There's a lot of big trucks going on too. So I am against this commercial property up on top. I'm against it. Thank you.
Let's see. Is there anybody else in opposition who hasn't spoken or has new testimony?
Someone wrote their name down here. Let's speak.
I'd like to speak during the general comments.
Okay, well, then, it looks like we're at general comments now.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I was just waiting to see if anyone else was going to speak in opposition.
Okay, now you're going to give us new information?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, again, for the record, Attorney Timothy Shields, 20 Water Street, Guilford. I'm here on behalf of my client, Veronica Lopez. She is the abutting neighbor at 64 River Road. We heard some testimony tonight from Attorney Casella about enclosure, and I unfortunately do have to bring up that subject again. It was touched upon before the prior hearing. I think what was essentially said and everyone agreed to at the prior hearing, I don't think anyone would object to my characterization of this tonight, is that there is no definition of that word within the regulations. When there is no definition of a word within the zoning regulations, our case law and precedent states that we look to the ordinary plain meaning of that word. I would offer tonight, and I can provide copies of this to the commission if everyone would like, but to find the usual meaning of the word, we need to look no further than the common dictionary. Enclosure, noun, something that encloses as a fence or a wall. An enclosed area, especially a tract of land surrounded by a fence. That's from the Webster's College Dictionary from 1991. Dating myself a bit there, but that's what I had on hand. That definition would, in this situation, be applicable to your regulations and your determination of what that word means. They're your regulations, as Attorney Casella rightly pointed out, it's up to you to make that determination. I would submit this definition tonight for your reference. In terms of the enclosure, it is applicable here, so it is actually very key to your determinations. We determined at the last hearing that Section 28 is applicable to your special exception permit for a farm, and this is directly in that regulation in terms of setbacks to the street and the sidelines. I'm going to comment about the site plan that was submitted this evening. I can only speak to my own expectation, but I certainly expected a full new survey, not another hand-drawn document, which is what you have before you. Again, it's your call as to whether or not the document, the site plan is acceptable. In terms of the location of the berm, so to speak, the vegetative buffer that they're now trying to characterize it as, they planted, from what I can see in the photos, a half dozen arborvitaes along the one portion of it. There is a required 25-foot vegetative buffer along the entire setback sideline, surrounding the whole area. It may be such that the site is situated, I can't tell from that drawing as to whether or not those piles are truly within 25 or 35 feet of the sideline setbacks. In terms of the berm that is there, that's an existing wood pile. To characterize that now as being a vegetative buffer and try to convert that over, I think flies in the face of the regulation. I also think that there is a serious question whether your regulation should be interpreted that not only the operation itself, but the storage of the materials are 35 feet from the setback, which from what I can see in the photos, it is not. Again, it's your determination to make this evening. We've heard a lot of things back and forth about the historical usage of the property. I will comment on that in terms of the simple fact that there is a question between legal use historically and illegal use historically. The courts have commented on that in the underlying enforcement action. I leave that memorandum of decision to you in my letter from the previous hearing, so you can refer back to that in terms of making your determinations. We heard some testimony from Attorney Casella that the adjacent properties are above the Cashman property. That is incorrect with respect to my client's property. The gradation on this property runs essentially southeast. My client's property is below his. I believe there is some testimony from my client in her letter about historically there being runoff. Commissioner Muscat was concerned about tannins. I believe my client may testify as well about some statements she has made to me about there being black effluent coming off of this property onto her property and onto River Road, which she attributes to those wood piles and the wood chips. Also, going back to that berm that is now being created into a vegetative buffer, I don't have the Clinton regulations in front of me, so I don't know the answer to this off my head, and I apologize for even having to go here, but this came up in Madison in another case that we were involved in, where wood chips were brought into a site, and it was determined that they exceeded the cubic yardage that was allowed to be brought in, essentially as fill. I don't know if Clinton has a similar regulation, but I would question whether or not, if it does, if that berm now would fall within those regulations. And again, the vegetative buffer has to go along the entire area where that is, which from the photographs it does not presently. I know that the commission waived the landscaping plan requirements, but this was one of the reasons why I had been objecting to those type of waivers at the previous hearing, because there's no real way to tell now exactly what is going to be used in terms of the vegetative buffer. I think that's all I have for the moment.
I spoke previously, but I have two things I wanted to bring up that I didn't speak about previously.
Okay, please state your name for the record.
I'll sign it. So Cheryl Fullerton, I live at 7 Deerfield Drive, and listening to some of the testimony, number one, I object to the fact that the property schematics were drawn up by the attorney for Cashman and Mr. Cashman. I think that it should be official, as she brought up, that a surveyor or somebody who's objective to bring up and survey the property so that we can get a schematics that are unbiased. I feel that's number one. And number two, I was just sitting here looking up, anybody can look up on the internet, about the toxic effects of wood piles and wood chips. It's not just tannin. It didn't say anything about tannin. It says that wood chips higher than 10 feet can reach a degree of greater than 69 degrees centigrade. That's 169 degrees Fahrenheit. It can and will catch on fire, because what happens is it becomes anaerobic. No oxygen can get to it. So therefore it becomes a combustible substance at the high temperature, and it does burn. It's not just mist coming off of it that we smell in the neighborhood. It's this fume. It also says that it releases ferments. It releases toxic acids that can leach into the soil, can leach into the water that's adjacent or near the property. It's not adjacent, but the stream. And that it gives a very specific environmental, that there should be ditches for runoff. It gives all the schematics. Again, I think that to say that it's safe by just giving somebody's word, I think that we should have a chemist or somebody who can give us the official word about wood chips. I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but just reading it in here, it doesn't sound good. And when I was standing at the property, near the property, even down the road, your eyes burn from what is being emitted from the wood pile. So I think that to say that it's safe, that it's clear, there's lots of evidence that is in the internet from scientists who talk about what it does to our environment, what it does to the air, what it does to our groundwater, what it does to the environment for over 10 feet high. I think his wood pile is way over 10 feet high, and it says that if you're going to keep a wood pile, it must be stirred to keep this from happening. There's no way you can stir his wood pile. I'm very concerned about it, because I live in the area, and the groundwater, and the Hammonasset River. It's right there. And with the rainstorm that we had the other day, no telling where that water ran off. Runs off into the neighbors, into their groundwater. Is it affecting their wells? That's my concern. So those are the two things I wanted to bring out. I think that this report is very biased. It's not official. It's not done by a survey. And that we need to have a study about this wood pile that everybody thinks is so safe. It's not that safe. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, going to speak in opposition.
Go ahead.
I apologize. Again, Tim Shields, for the record. I couldn't read my own notes before, excuse me. There was two other points I wanted to make. There's been a lot of talk again about historical usage of the property. The mulching business, obviously, I do not believe anyone here tonight would say that that would go back to the original time that Mr. Cashman purchased the property. Speaking of that use and whether it's in harmony with the surrounding areas as you're supposed to determine under your regulations for the special exception permit, the commission, I believe it was Commissioner Busquet, made comments at the last hearing about a similar type of application for wood chip processing. The proposal was denied in an industrial zone down the road from this particular area. I think it would be hard-pressed for the commission to make that determination that this type of use would be in harmony with a residential area if it wasn't in harmony with an industrial. I know each application has to be taken on its own, but I just put that out there for thought. The other thing about the wood processing, part of this is a component of agriculture. Attorney Casella will correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I do believe the regulation that we are here tonight was a regulation change that Mr. Cashman proposed back in 2013 that would allow for this type of operation to be run and to include wood chipping in an agricultural setting, which I think most of us in the common definition would agree. When we think about a farm, we don't think about a wood chipping business. We think about dairy farms, cattle farms, things of that nature. Thank you.
Okay. Is there anyone else that would like to provide testimony against this application? And in that case, now for general comments.
My name is Kristen Cafferty. This is Matt Cafferty. We live at 70 River Road. Our property is directly adjacent to the Cashman property. We have lived and owned the property since 2001. We would like to note that when we bought the property, the Cashmans did not have a farm as it stands right now. We are not here to speak in favor of the farm and mulching business, but we're also not here to speak against it, for it or against it. That's why we want to speak in general. What we're here to ask is for Planning and Zoning Commission to interpret the zoning law regarding enclosure of the farm animals to include fencing and corral. Considering the Cashman's corral contains his animals during the day, a good 12 plus hours of the day, we feel it should be considered an enclosure. We'd also ask that due to that legal barrier be upheld by the Cashman property. We appreciate the mulching that they have started to look into that buffer. The enclosure, including fencing and corral, from our understanding, should be 50 feet from the front of the property and 35 feet from the side of the property, and with a 25 feet of vegetation, including, again, around the corral. And of course, we ask that also 35 feet from the property line of the mulching piles also be upheld. We feel strongly that Mr. Cashman should be able to enjoy his property and run his business. We consider ourselves good neighbors and have had a good relationship with the Cashmans since we've lived there. But we also feel strongly that the surrounding property owners should be allowed to enjoy their property and protect their property values. We believe that that is why the zoning laws are set with the setback requirements and why the corral and fencing should be considered enclosures. Would you like a copy of this?
May I ask you for one bit of clarification?
Sure.
You stated that it's not the, it made it sound like it wasn't a farm when you moved in, or?
When we moved in, we believed it was landscaping. So whatever that classifies at. We were young and didn't, but there, at the time, unless small animals, there were no animals of our knowledge at the time, but I can't speak to before we moved there.
Okay.
Just one thing.
Please state your name for the record.
Ron Galota, 64 River Road. Excuse me. I believe Mr. Casella stated that Mr. Cashman's property does not bring down the property value of other homes in the area, but then Mr. Cashman filed a blight complaint against me stating that because my property looks like a dump, he was bringing down his property value. So how can my property, which is clean, bring down his property value when he has so much going on it? And I don't have farm animals, I don't have excessive vehicles, I don't do a mulching business, but my property is bringing down his property value. Thank you.
At this time, are there questions from the commission for the applicant? Oh, do you have more general comment?
Yeah, let's keep them down.
Yes, someone, I'm sorry.
Tim Winninger, 11 Jamaica Road. It's actually this property here, even though it's listed as 9, that number's been changed. It was changed many years ago because it was 2 9s in the same road. I've lived on Jamaica Road since 1962, and in 1962, the Cashman property was owned by Hoppy Dotson, and it was a field. Hoppy Dotson had built there, and it was a farm. He had animals there. So it was a farm when he built there. So it's been a farm for a lot of years. It's not something new. So I don't know if that's been stated before or not, but I can tell you right now, we were over petting rabbits and feeding chickens at Hoppy's place a long time ago. So as far as the farm is concerned, and that from day one, I'm not sure what's been said before, but anyway. And where we're at here, the both businesses here, we're probably affected by that by more than anybody else in the neighborhood. Every time it's ground, every time it's delivered, we either hear, smell, whatever. However, the steaming eyes and things like that, it's not, I've never had that problem. We get a little dust, of course, but Jeff waters it down constantly, and so it keeps the dust down, so it's not a big problem. And the only thing that we're concerned with is trucks coming up on Sundays. Other than that, I don't have a big problem with it. So, again, we're right next door, and we're going to be affected by this by far more than anybody else. So, I'm not sure if that's really in favor of or just information about the farm itself and about the multiples. So.
Tim, would you show them what property was the homestead when you were a kid? Which property was yours when you grew up as a child?
Yes. It's Jamaica Road. We were on 6th Jamaica Road is where we. Now let's see, all right. So it's
For the record, Jamaica Road runs parallel up in here. Jamaica Road is right here.
Oh, it's
On the
okay.
opposite side of the
Yeah,
road.
it's right there. So I grew up here on Jamaica Road, and now I'm here on Jamaica Road, so I'm not from Simon. So we've been there for a lot of years. In fact, we moved again 1962 we moved in. And we used to play baseball in that field until Hoppy built to this farm.
Thank you.
For the record, Ken Slater, town attorney, I wanted to comment on a couple of things that have come up during the course of this. As you recall, I made the recommendation that the commission should make a decision about some of the waivers and excusals before the public hearing closed to give an opportunity for the applicant to present some more information rather than close the hearing, deny it, and another application. There's a request today by Attorney Casella to ask you to do the same thing with respect to enclosure. And I think there's a better alternative to that. Now, the real issue for enclosure, and Attorney Shields correctly pointed out, if you look up the word enclosure by itself, a fence is certainly enclosure. You enclose animals, and the word by itself is enclosure. There really is two, in my view, a couple of alternatives in the way you can interpret the regulation, and I think they're both plausible. So in no court, there's been a suggestion that a court has ruled on it. They have not. The only thing that's happened to date is the court ruled that because there was no appeal from the zoning board from an enforcement decision to the ZBA, the court would not entertain some of the arguments that Mr. Cashman made. So you are making the decision for the commission for the first time. One alternative, which is one last meeting I suggested might be compelling to me, but I really, no pun intended, on the fence. All livestock should be kept in a building, stable, or enclosure. You don't take one word out of a definition or a statute or regulation, you read them together. So one alternative is that just a series of words intended to apply to making sure there's something that shelters an animal, in which case a roof matters. And the use of the word enclosure there might be to distinguish it. I mean, buildings and stables, they're both buildings. But an enclosure could be something that's not a formal building, but is temporary, a temporary chicken coop, or something like that wouldn't qualify as a stable. The other alternative, which would be the alternative that's advocated a moment ago by another neighbor and by Attorney Shields, is that what this is really intended to talk about when they refer to this, and they refer to the setbacks, is how close animals should be to a residential use. So that it's not a traditional setback at all, it's not where the building is, but it is intended to decide how far away. And one argument on that side of the ledger is it says the setback for the appropriate zone for any abutting residential or village zone property. It doesn't refer to all properties, it only refers to a residential or village. And in the way I would, if I were to adopt that interpretation, not as a traditional setback, but as a measure of how far away should it be from a residence, in that case, I wouldn't think of it as a true setback. For example, on the front of the road, on the front of the property, and not immediately adjoining a residential property, it's a road. There is residential property across the street. You should make sure that the fence would be at least the distance from a residential setback from that other person's residential property along that line. On the other line, that is a major opponent to the application, the setback would make sure that wherever the animals are kept, and whatever they're kept, fenced or sheltered with a roof over their heads, that setback from her property be maintained, so that the fence would have to be moved back away from her property. That's the way I would interpret it if you treated it as intended, not to make sure that there was shelter for animal, but it was intended to try to make sure your animals were kept a certain distance from a residential property. So my suggestion in this case, I don't think you need to keep the public hearing open and make that ruling during the course of the hearing, because it's a pretty easy fix if your commission decides that A, we're going to grant a special permit, but B, we're going to interpret this regulation not as the way the applicant is advocating, which is enclosure is just part of the list, and you have to just make sure you have some kind of structure where the animals get shelter, and that structure must be at least the setback away, or alternatively, that it's intended to make sure the animals are a certain distance from residential properties. That can be made as a condition to a special permit approval. They'd have to modify the plan and they'd have to move the fence, but you wouldn't have to deny the application if you interpret it against the way the applicant is doing. So Because of that, I don't think you need to make the decision during the hearing, allow them to make a change and come back, because I think the fencing and the corral to keep it a distance away from this neighbor can be easily accomplished by way of a modification or a condition to the approval. So that's really up, I'd ask you to really carefully look at that, probably you wouldn't without me saying so, but I can easily argue either side of that and could defend it, and you have to decide what, even though some of you might have been on the commission when it was adopted, decide what you think is meant by that, what its purpose is, and apply it accordingly. The other thing I wanted to mention, Mr. Chairman, is I thought after in light of some of the concerns about, or I know, after some of the concerns about soil erosion controls, that the acting town planner had gone out and done some inspections. And your commission has the ability to hear from me even after the close of the public hearing and from the planner, the assistant zoning enforcement officer or acting zoning enforcement officer. But that would happen after the close of the public hearing, only if we comment on the information that was presented during the hearing. To the extent that you want to hear it all, information that's different than what's been presented, it needs to happen during the public hearing. So if you want to hear from Mr. Downs, who's here, regarding his observations when he went out, there were some questions Public Works had raised, trying to get an idea of how the stormwater flows are out there. He did go out during some storm events and did some inspections. So I would suggest that if the commission wants to hear from him, that should happen before the close of the public hearing and not afterwards. So any questions of me on the points that have come up so far during the public hearing?
So you made I think your second point was that we could modify it, but couldn't we do that even if we said it was an enclosure? Even if we say, yes, that is, an enclosure is a fenced-in area, we can still modify this to say we need it this far, right?
Yes.
So a little bit on enclosures. I did a little bit of investigation in between meetings. I went to Tractor Supply. Most of the fencing is called enclosures. I went to a couple farmers and asked them, what is the part around the barn called? It's called an enclosure. I think it starts to get a little silly when we're trying to say that what an enclosure is. A pool has an enclosure around it. The Playmobil set that we all had as kids comes with the barn and the enclosure. I just can't believe I'm sitting on a planning and zoning commission trying to decide what the definition of an enclosure is. So I think the enclosure issue is so important. Nobody's saying, I don't think anybody's saying maybe there shouldn't be a farm there or maybe there should be. But I certainly wouldn't want somebody putting pigs on my property line. So, yeah, let's...
You're now in deliberation.
No.
Yeah.
What I'm getting at is that we should decide tonight what an enclosure is so that the applicant, before the public hearing closes, can look at his application and decide how he would address that.
Remove the fence.
That would be on the site plan, right? Before the public hearing
No,
closes?
no, it doesn't have to be before, it can be a condition.
Or as a condition.
I mean, he's asked for it, so by all means, you could do
He asked
it
for it.
during
I'm
the
trying
public
to
hearing.
give, as one member, am trying to give Mr. Casella what he wanted.
And you certainly can do that. Just what I'm suggesting is, there's some kinds of modifications where somebody say, oh, you can't use that kind of a design of a retaining wall, we need you to do a completely different design. You certainly don't want to do that just as a condition because it involves some complexity, some analysis, etc. It didn't seem to me that if you decide that what the enclosure means is it has to be a certain distance from the residential property, that there was some complexity involved. And I might be missing something, and Mr. Casella could correct me on that, or you could simply just do what he's asked, and you could make a vote on whether or not whether you interpret that enclosure to mean a shelter for the animals, or whether that is intended to deal with how distant the use is going to be from a residential use. Both alternatives I could argue for, because often language isn't perfectly clear, and this is definitely not perfectly clear language. But I think both of them could be supported, and you're the folks who have to decide that. So if you decide it and you want the applicant to modify the plan, to modify the enclosure, then by all means.
I would like to ask Lawrence Downs to tell us, you were out on the property. Can you give us a summary of what you found?
Yeah, I've been out at the site twice in the last week. Tuesday is my normal day in Town Hall to do the permitting that we do there in town, in the land use office. And for the hour before I come in here, from noon to 1 on September 25th, which is that Tuesday that we had so much rain, I went out to the site. I took some pictures in front of the Cashman property in the driveway. I went up Jamaica Road, looked at the properties at the top and the water coming down, and basically made observations of what I thought the stormwater was doing and whether any of the stormwater was running off of the Cashman property on the properties either to the north or onto the road. I didn't drive on to Mrs. Lopez's property, but I stopped in front and made observations of what was coming down the driveway. So my observations were, and I do have a couple of pictures of what I took out here, there was definitely water coming down the driveway, like there was on all the sites on River Road that day. At this site, I didn't see the water flowing across the road. Further south, you could see sheet flow of, a significant amount of water coming off hillsides running across the road to the riverside. I didn't see that here. What I saw was drainage flowing into the storm basin, and this is where Ed commented that it was their opinion that the water was running clear, et cetera, et cetera. Those were my observations, and I have a photo of that. I didn't notice any debris coming down that gravel driveway and out into the roadway, and the water that's flowing into the storm basin looked clear to me. The water coming down the driveway itself, I can't tell you whether there were tannins in it, but it didn't look colored to me. It looked clear. You could see the color of the whitish gravel there. Again, whether that's an issue or not, I didn't observe anything there that would lead me to believe that's the case. Now, for Jamaica Road, I had heard some concerns, and I think it was from Public Works, that there was the possibility of stormwater drainage running off of the site up where the mulching is towards the top of the property and over onto these properties just to the north. I have some pictures here too. As I said, there was plenty of drainage coming down Jamaica Road, which is a gravel road, but from my observations, I think that that water was coming from the residential properties adjacent to the road itself. And at the very top of Jamaica Road, there is a significant patch of asphalt, not just a driveway apron, but the roadway itself. And a lot of the water was running off of that, and it was channeled down the middle. The house at the top has a nice yard. I didn't notice any water coming from Cashman onto this property. There was a photo that you saw that Ed submitted to you. All those photos that he showed you, I took when I was out there on Friday, the 28th with them, and I was the one who put all the markings on them and all the dimensions, and I participated in making those measurements. I was holding the tape measure, and the reason I did that and submitted those photos to him to submit to you was, number one, it was more convenient for him to make all those copies and give them to you. But I knew because of the request for more detailed information that I would likely be asked to confirm measurements that they made, so I went out there and I made those measurements with them. And as I said, actually held the tape measure when we were measuring those lines. So those measurements on those photos I can attest to because I participated in making those measurements. Let's see. One of those photos, and Mr. Chairman, you asked about this, there was a photo looking towards River Road with a property line, and there was a yellow curved line. And what that was meant to show was a swale that exists between the Cashman property and this property up here. That photo was up in this area. And basically, I can't say that the adjacent property was higher than the Cashman property, but what I can say from the photo and from my observation is that there was a swale there. And to me, any stormwater that would flow to the north would be intercepted by that swale and end up starting to move down towards River Road. So I didn't see any indication or observe any stormwater flowing towards Jamaica Road at the top of the property.
Where does the swale go?
Pardon me?
Where does the swale go?
Parallel
You've
to
got
the
all
property
this water,
line.
does it stay on 66, or does it go to the north, to the south,
It-
east to the west?
Well, the whole property slopes towards River Road. So from the very top of the property, it would go into the swale and find its way eventually
There's no swale
downhill.
at the bottom.
Well, no, because any water that would flow in up there, and like I said, I didn't see any water flowing in that direction at the time. I didn't see any evidence of mulch or anything showing that on the Tuesday before there was flow that way. But what I'm saying is if water would flow that way, it would go into the swale and probably soak into it, and anything that didn't soak would head south. And I find it unlikely that so much water would go into that swale that it would, before absorbing into the ground, find its way all the way down to the road, because it's quite a distance from the top down to the road. That would be my observation. Now, in front of Mrs. Lopez's property, there was water coming off the driveway as well, the same as with Cashman, but I wouldn't say it was out of the ordinary, the amount of water coming off. And again, that Tuesday was such a heavy rain, and when I was out there, it was actually pouring. I didn't see anything that I wouldn't expect during a heavy rain in terms of a tremendous amount washing either to the north or to the south. Mrs. Lopez said that there's been water, black stained water. At least on that Tuesday, I didn't witness anything like that. All right, so that's the drainage. If you have any questions on that, well, should I handle that first, Gary?
Well, I'd like you to go ahead and finish your...
Okay, so like I said, those pictures of the mulch pile, again, I can attest to the dimensions. One thing that was brought up by Attorney Shields was the dimension of the berm here on the south side. There's a fence line over on this side. You can see here's the fence. And one of those pictures was a picture on that berm of Ed kind of pointing down to the bottom of the outside of the berm. That's where that fence post was, according to the survey, is even inside the property line. So what we did there was take a tape measure and measure as best we could. Jeff Stout stood down at the post and held the tape as high as he could. And I stood at the top and basically bent down to get a partial measurement to the top of the berm. And then we turned around and got the measurement to the base of the inside of the berm. And that dimension was, as I said on that photo, anywhere from 38 to 40 feet. So based on that measurement, at least the inside of the toe of that berm is more than 35 feet off. Now, the measurements that I showed of the work area for the mulch start at the base of the inside of the berm. Now, you would have to make a determination whether that berm that has been described as once part of the mulching operation and now a stable berm, or will be stabilized, where operations won't occur. They won't be adding mulch to that or taking it away in deliveries. That was one of my confusions at the beginning of this. I thought that was part of their operation as well, and it may have been in the past. But what they're saying now is it's a berm that will remain in place as a buffer. Again, you'll have to interpret that how you will, but what they're saying is that from the toe, the inside of the berm, the roadway that goes around the big pile, that measurement, which is 150 by 70 on the south side and 85 on the north, measures, I think I calculated 11,652. So I went out there with Ed and Jeff and actually helped them make those measurements. So again, I can confirm that I consider those accurate within a couple of feet, and based on the 15,000 square foot measurement and the distance off the property line for that berm, I think they're accurate enough to be considered as what you need in information to make a determination. Again, the berm and whether it's completely planted or not, that's something you have to consider. But with those photos, at least you can say what it looks like. I'm not sure if any of you have actually been up to that part of the site, but I figured these photos would help you actually see what it looks like.
I have to start with, I am more than concerned about the fact that you're holding the other end of the tape measure and helping an applicant put together his site plan, and how that's going to result in any appeal that could happen on this.
Well, as I said...
Let me finish.
No. Let
Mr.
me
Chairman,
address that.
I have
Let me
floor.
address it.
I think it is highly inappropriate.
Let him address it.
Now, if that
Gary,
person
Stop,
was...
let him address it.
As I said, because it was requested that a detailed site plan be presented and more information, I figured that I would be questioning questions just like you are. And so if they put information on that, I wanted to be out there to actually witness him doing it. And by holding the tape measure, I can confirm that it's accurate. So that's the reason that I was out there doing that. Because I figured someone here would turn to me and say, well, Mr. Downs, did you look at the site plan and can you confirm that these numbers are accurate? Yes, I can, because I went out there and measured. That was the reason.
Well, normally, we would have a surveyor, and we would take their license as, and not worry about whether our CEO, acting CEO is putting that math together. We would have an engineer looking at it and asking him to do this information. This is a big deal when it's going to come to the appeal, because it looks like that our acting CEO is acting as an agent for the applicant. I can't be the only one who has noticed that. So let's just put that in the public record. I don't know that our acting zoning enforcement officer should be doing this.
Well,
And would they do it for my application? And would they do it for the next person's application? If we're going to start letting our zoning enforcement officer measure with the applicant.
is supposed to be able to do a site visit. And that is what he
That's
did.
way beyond the site visit, Mr. Chairman. Literally, his testimony was that he helped him put the site plan together. His testimony. That's all I have on that. Secondly,
Gary, if I may, again, if you're going to challenge me on that, you're going to listen to my explanation.
excuse me, I am the elected official, and
Well,
we
if
will
you
listen
are
to
challenging
Mr.
my
Chairman.
integrity-
Both of you, stop it. You're both cut off.
Okay.
I have a,
You're cut off.
Mr. Chairman,
No.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question about the mulch pile. I've stood and I request to be recognized. Right, Robert's rules, you must recognize me.
That's not true.
That's not true.
Yes, it is. I can't ask about the mulch pile.
No, because you got out of hand. Sit down.
Can I ask the question later?
Possibly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question?
Of us, yes.
Pertains to Mr. Downs' testimony. He testified that he put the measurements on the pictures, the site plan.
No, I didn't put them on the site plan. I helped measure them, and the applicant did.
Okay, I apologize for this presentation. What I'm curious is, was there a measurement taken for the top of the mulch pile up here in this area? Because the original site plan showed the mulch pile curving all the way around this area, coming up almost close to where you see an iron pipe bound. What's the distance there? Is that more than 35 feet from the edge of the property? I don't know if that would be appropriately addressed to Mr. Downs or to the applicant.
That would be better for the applicant, so.
I'm
It
sorry.
was the applicant that took the measurements.
It was the applicant.
What was the question?
With my assistance, holding the tape.
The original site plan shows the berm, the mulch pile, coming up in this area here. How far is it from this corner of the property? Is it more than 35 feet?
I don't have the specific information. That measurement wasn't taken. From the, when you're talking about the iron pipe at the stone wall.
Is that not a part of the requirement that you need to meet, that the mulch pile be within 35 feet?
Yep. It is. So we don't have the measurement on the plan.
So again, we go back to the issue of the adequacy of the site plan that I raised at the first hearing, which I must raise again with this.
I have a couple issues with the site plan. Accuracy is one of them. regardless of who pulls the tape measure, it's not a certified plan by a licensed surveyor. Even the residential applications we get have surveyed plans, they have engineered stormwater runoff controls. This is probably the first farm we've had to deal with since I've been on the commission. I'm not sure where it lands or what kind of qualifications need to be shown on this, but somewhere between, you would think it would be somewhere between commercial and residential. Even the residential has the 2-foot contours, so we can see which way the water flows, where the silt fence goes. I can't tell on this plan what's high, what's low, where the water goes. By the markings on the plan, they're not meeting the setbacks. There's areas here where they call out 25 feet, 28 feet vegetated. That doesn't meet the 35, so they're stating they're not in compliance. I'm not against this, but I don't think anybody's actually read what our definition of vegetative buffers are, because these pictures are far, far from a vegetative buffer. Section 26.8, if you'd like to review it. For example, it says at 5 feet to 15 feet of depth, comprised of 2 rows of suitable deciduous trees of minimum 3-inch caliper DBH for evergreen trees 8 feet in height, spaced 15 feet apart, staggered in rows 15 feet apart. Spacing between the trees shall be filled with evergreen or deciduous shrub planting. There's not a picture in here that even comes close to that. And without that being on the plan as a proposed improvement, we have no way to know what it's supposed to be, or no way to check after it becomes established that it's in compliance with the plan. And that's where I struggle with the plan that's been proposed.
Okay. We are not supposed to be deliberating, right? This is
I
supposed to be
understand.
questions
Yeah.
to the,
Okay, and that's, and my question is kind of to you. I don't know whether this is a deliberative question or not, it's more of a definitional one. Basically, my question was that we had the Merriam-Webster definition of enclosure read to us and entered into the record. Enclosure has a very specific agricultural meaning in, English farm history, Irish farm history. If we wanted to include that historical definition, is this the time to do it or to bring that up, or does that belong as part of the definition, part of the deliberation?
do you have that definition?
Well, I would have to, I'd want to look it up, but I do know that historically, enclosure refers to the fact that what had been the commons, where everybody grazed their animals together, was instead enclosed, which was to say surrounded by fences and walls, with each farmer having his own. And
So very similar to the Webster dictionary.
It is, but I mean, if this is a specific agricultural definition, agricultural history definition of enclosure, and we can go back to the Enclosure Act in England and then how it was imported to Ireland into the farms there. I mean, there's a lot of history.
What I would like to do now is let the applicant answer any additional questions.
Can I add one more question?
Well, go ahead and ask
Did I
it.
ask last time? I just wanted clarification on that.
Go ahead.
I asked last time the difference, the definition around first grind, second grind, and the third grind, according to EEEP, that Mr. Casella, Attorney Casella, mentioned that he had the definition. I'm going to get it.
Let's see what I have.
That's my question.
Mr. Chairman, may I just apologize for my outburst to you and to Gary and the commission and everybody here. If this was a normal application where there weren't waivers from the site plan, I certainly wouldn't be out there making measurements if the surveyor was doing it. under the unusual circumstances, that's why I felt that I should confirm measurements that were made that were going to be put on that hand-drawn site.
There's a letter in the packet, which is Exhibit 16, that deals with first grinds from Frank Gagliardi, who's the supervising environmental analyst for the Waste Engineering Enforcement Division, Bureau of Materials Management and Compliance Assurance at DEEP. If you want, I can just read it in it. It may answer your question. You may need more information, but at least we can.
Number 16, you said?
16. In the original, in the August 13 packet submission, there's a number of documents attached.
Go ahead and read it, please.
Okay. It's addressed to Mr. Cashman, dated in June of 2012. This email may be considered an official response to your question. Initially, we spoke by phone on June 13th. As I recall, you called to ask whether your farm needed a solid waste permit to receive first grind wood chips that you would then regrind and color for sale to the landscape industry or the public. My response was that you do not require a permit because the department views first grind as a marketable commodity since it already has received some level of processing. However, you cannot take in any other waste, i.e. stumps, with first grind. You cannot take in leaves for composting without a leaf registration. You would need a permit if you were to bring in unprocessed clean wood waste from off-site locations and then process into first grind or finished product. The two types of permits for clean wood waste to choose from are registration under recycling general permit, single item facility, in which you would be able to have on-site at any time 3,000 cubic yards unprocessed and 2,000 cubic yards unprocessed. The other permit choice would be an individual permit for a volunteer reduction facility. Quantities of unprocessed and processed wood waste on-site would depend on site characteristics. If at some point you would take in storm-related debris, as some farms did after Tropical Storm Irene and Halloween Storm Alfred, you would need to request emergency authorization even if it is first grind material. The reason is that FEMA has to know all waste is going to a permitted facility in municipalities. If sending their wood waste out to a location, need to document for FEMA that it is a permitted facility. This helps the municipality in getting FEMA assistance reimbursements more quickly and helps us keep a log of facilities receiving wood waste or first grind so that we can direct other municipalities to these locations. Finally, all wood chip piles need to be managed from spontaneous combustion resulting in fire. Wood chip piles should be situated in windrows no higher than 15 feet with 25 feet between for emergency access vehicles. There's a blanket EA, which is emergency authorization that gives the proper management procedures for wood chips. So I don't know if that answered your question. Maybe Jeff can define what first grind is based on his experience with the DEP.
When you were reading the statement, you mentioned no stumps.
Yes.
Okay. Can we confirm that there are no stumps that are grinded there?
Can you confirm that?
Absolutely. You can see it right in the pictures that have been submitted tonight. It's all just chips.
Yes.
I have a couple questions for Torrance. So, in the picture, I wish these pictures were numbered. There's a picture here of the wood chip pile, and there's a red truck to the left of it. What's in the left-hand part of the picture that I circled? You were on there. You may not know by the picture. You may not remember. It looks like
maybe pallet pieces.
it looks like demolition.
Check my piece.
This here?
Yeah. Yeah. Those are pallets that we use in our chicken coop to walk up on top of the chicken coops when we walk into chicken coops.
Okay. And then the other question I have for you, Torrance, is that you gave testimony, you won't need the picture, you gave testimony that the hill is stable. Are you talking about this hill or this hill?
I think Attorney Casella mentioned during, from the stormwater flow that nothing was moving from it. So he said that, but I would say that being there 3 days after, I didn't see evidence of anything having floated off the amount, and what I would be referring to is this and this amount in this area.
So in your opinion, once he starts grinding this and reducing it and making it smaller, can we so here's my concern. He grinds this pile, he moves it to the side, he makes it smaller, we get a storm like we had, and by your own picture, the water comes down the road and out to River Road. And you gave testimony that you didn't see anything going across River Road.
Not in that location.
So, is there, I guess the question for the applicant is there a way to mitigate, water definitely is controlled on three sides. Is there a way to mitigate the water from getting into the Hammonasset River? I mean, for me, I would need to know some way, and I can't just go by an applicant saying, trust me. I need to know that pollutants aren't going to enter the Hammonasset River. And
Possibly.
because of that, I'd like to have an engineer look at this.
I can't get.
I don't know if you
didn't see it
comments
at
on
that.
top.
Well, like I said, there were other properties where there was sheet flow going across the road and into the grassed area on the Hammonasset River side. I didn't see it there because there are residential properties across the street that would prevent it from at least sheet flow flowing across the river. I guess that's all I can say. A little bit more, the driveway apron has some elevation to it, so it acts as somewhat of a berm there. It's not a tremendous amount of elevation because some water flowed over it. But if down there was more of an elevation put, and possibly on the grass just to the north, if a little bit of a berm could be put there, at least the water coming down wouldn't
Might be similar to a rain garden.
possibly. And, some water would still flow to that storm basin. And perhaps in really extreme events, all of it wouldn't necessarily flow to the road. Some of it would be routine and such. So, that's a possibility.
Okay.
Anything else, Greg?
Okay.
I just have one tiny bit of clarification from Torrance. You had specifically referred to being out there and doing measurements with people who you called Ed and Jeff.
Oh.
Could you clarify for the record that Jeff is Mr. Cashman, the applicant?
The
I assume,
applicant and
that
his
Ed
attorney.
is Mr. Casella,
Yes.
his attorney. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, Stella, if you,
I think we would like to continue the hearing to be able to provide more specific information to address some of the questions that have come up, including the interpretation question, stormwater question, the detail of the site plan question.
okay.
I think we need to consent to a continuance
Yes, that's
of
what
the hearing.
35.
I know it's 35 days, so we would consent. I thought I drafted something here, I didn't. You're gonna have to deal with my hand scribble. If you need it in writing, I can provide it in writing.
Yes, we need it in writing.
Yep, but we consent to a continuance of the time to close the public hearing. When's your next meeting?
The next one is November 5th.
November 5th, until November 5th, so it's another 34 days or whatever it is. But we consent to continuance under Connecticut General Statutes 8-7D to allow the public hearing to remain open until and through November 5th. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question before you get to that continuation matter?
Okay.
Pertaining to the storm drain that's at the base of the property, I just asked a general question, if someone can determine where that storm drain flows to. I don't know if it flows to the river or not.
Okay. The other issue, and I think we can do this tonight, is the one about the enclosure and what we mean by that. And so I would like to give the applicant what they asked for and have the commission tell them what we feel about that enclosure and where that fence line should be. Harry's already given his point of view on this. Does anybody else have a statement?
I agree with Gary. I think enclosure in this case, I don't think we can treat a fence that retains the animals as a fence. It allows the use of the property to come up into the buffer, and I think that the enclosures need to meet the required setbacks.
I think there are two things that we're discussing, right? I think we're talking about two different things. One is the setback, and the other part is the enclosure with roof and enclosure within the building. Given the special exception nature of this application in a residential area, I can be convinced, but right now, I think it should be enclosed.
So you mean the fence is part of the enclosure?
Fence, no, fence, I think what one of the person who was explaining it, she said the animals are out for 12 hours, 10 to 12 hours during the day, but eventually the animals have to be in an enclosed area. The shelter or barn, whatever you call it.
Mr. Chairman, but I think I'm on seeing it a different way. We're not saying that the animals should be enclosed. We're saying once they get let out in the daytime, that little fence around the chicken coop, they don't call it a chicken enclosure, they call it a chicken coop. The area around the chicken coop, is that an enclosure? That's for you to decide. But
Well, is that within the setback or?
well, we're determining. If
Yeah.
it's a fence, if we say it's a fence, then there is no setback. If we're saying that that is part of the enclosure, they can put pigs on, I'm just using pigs as a smelly animal, like maybe chickens are smelly too. You could theoretically, and we would set a precedent, put livestock right on somebody's line. Now, when I looked it up, for instance, horse grazing is considered fences, 30, 40, 50 acres was considered fencing. The smaller an area you got, it became an enclosure. Well, for me.
This is a smaller area, I would think, 3.5 acres.
Right. So the question is, and I would like a motion actually for this, is somehow get a motion. Would be, well, I'll make it as a motion, and ask somebody to make this. And, a motion that the fences are the enclosure and must abide by the setbacks.
That the fencing,
Constitutes the clip.
the fencing or walls that enclose, that confine the animals be construed as the enclosure, and that it must comply with the setback requirements of the regulation. Is that the motion you want?
I'll make that motion.
If I could pencil it for the record, town attorney, one thing we know from that regulation, I 100% agree you can interpret that enclosure to mean a fence, but one thing that is very clear is it doesn't say that it's subject to all setbacks. If this was not on a residential property under your regulation, you could put a fence right up to the boundary. What it says is that it has to be, that the enclosure can't be less than the legal setback for the appropriate zone for an abutting residential or village zone property. So I would advise you, if you were to adopt the fact that a fence is an enclosure for this, that when you apply it, it's not that it's subject to a setback like a building is, but that the fence must be located at least the distance of the residential setback from any residential property. So in that case, if the fence were going to be over here, it would have to be that far. If it were over here, it would have to be the setback. But if you're not abutting a residential property, for example, right on the road, or if the back were industrial property, that, in those instances, the fence can be located on the boundary. So if I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but it's not truly a setback if you were to require, decide that a fence is an enclosure, but it would impose a distance requirement from residential properties.
I have a question for the attorney. So there's
Yeah, well, I didn't hear a second, but.
second.
Well, I think I need clarification on
All right.
this.
Wait.
Can change, that's why I don't know how you want to word it.
Okay.
I think the attorney got up right before you make that motion, let me speak, so I think we're not there yet. So I have a question for the attorney. It's an interesting point, is the applicant may even come back and talk about, there's a wire that runs all the way to the back. Is it grandfathered as a fence? Just saying.
Yeah, there's the survey shows a fence that runs down the property line,
Yep.
a barbed wire fence, and continues up into the rear of the property.
If you're talking farm, that's already there.
I think that's part of what the photographs show, is that animals were historically kept in exactly that portion of the property for many years. I can see those photos again. For example, this property shows it probably clearest, which is photo B. What you're looking at behind the horse and the gentleman is Mrs. Lopez's driveway. And you can actually see the old enclosure that in River Road is on the right-hand side of the picture. I'll let you, that's just factual information. So that in the front of the property and along that side was an enclosure. I think the other ones show similar fence lines that were, again, testimony is these pictures were taken in the 90s.
Okay. I'd like to get back to the motion.
Yeah, so, yeah, I
Can you
managed,
restate it?
yeah, well, what I'm trying to do, just to remind me for a second, if we define an enclosure for purposes of the animals as being something that could be composed of fencing material or wall material,
Right.
but that it would be an enclosure when it was containing or designed to contain animals, then it would have to meet the setbacks only if it were adjacent to a residential area? Is that what would be the goal?
I could say per our regulations, because our regulations spell out when it has to meet the setbacks from the residence.
Okay, so the regulations say that if we define this as being, if we define a structure made of fencing material, let's not call it a fence, or of wall material as the enclosure when it is designed or designed and intended to contain animals, where they have an enclosure, then it has to meet the regulations, the setbacks of the regulations. Is that correct?
Well, I think the suggestion that you made, Councilor, again for the record, is an excellent one, in that if the only thing you decide is you simply say, and I'm suggesting this is a possible motion, that a fence is an enclosure for the purposes of section 28.1.4, then the rest of the regulations can just be applied the way that they're stated here. And then I would suggest that would require that there's the 35-foot distance on any residential property, on boundaries which are not abutting a residential property. You're not subject to that limitation, and that would be a subject of interpretation. My problem with the original motion is that you're subject to setbacks. It is really, you're not subject to setbacks. It all depends on where you are. So if you just simply decide that a fence is an enclosure, then the regulation can just be applied and the applicant can modify the plan.
Make a motion that we consider an enclosure to be a fence, or a fence to be an enclosure.
Okay, do we have a second?
Consider a fence to be an enclosure, but do you want?
Nope, that's it, period.
Discussion.
Discussion.
So if the fence can be an enclosure, he already has grandfather fence.
It's not grandfather's, it's not a legal use right now.
This is a.
Well, the other part of that question would be, is it a non-conformity that was existing prior to the regulation? Okay, because then it would be a legal non-conformity.
This is a litigation that says otherwise, and we're trying to get it into conformance.
Well, no, but I think that's what is being asked. is
Mr.
a
Chairman,
legal non-conformity.
We're starting to go down this road that we had originally said we weren't going to do, which was we would look at this as a new application for a farm in a residential neighborhood. And now we're looking at, whether there was a piece of wire that went down and whether it was a farm in the past, and I've looked at pictures, whether it was a farm in the past. I'm not going to determine that. I'm not. I don't think I'm intelligent enough to determine that. I don't have enough background to determine.
Well, that's actually key to some of the...
I have testimony tonight that the wire, that there were no animals on the farm prior to 1991. So I don't know what that wire did. Or I also have testimony that there was animals on the
Yes,
farm
there was
prior
also-
to 1991. So, and I don't know that that wire kept those animals in. I only know that there's a wire going down the side. I think in terms of the motion, I don't think it really makes a difference either way.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay, I'd like to call a vote on this motion.
Do we have a second?
Yes.
Now,
Restate which motion it is that we're.
Go ahead and say it again.
That we consider a fence to be an enclosure.
Correct. That's it. Very simple. Fence is an enclosure for livestock.
motion.
Well, and for livestock, it's a different motion from, is livestock in the motion? or
No,
not?
I said that.
For the purposes of section 28.1.4, should we read that as a friendly amendment?
Yes.
Right, so we're now, so instead we're trying to make a friendly amendment that for purposes of the section as cited,
Right.
offense would be considered enclosed. So does
You
Adam
accept that, Adam?
2814H.
H. 28.1.4.H is the definition you guys are working on right now. For the section.
Okay.
I accept.
Okay. Okay. All in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? Motion? No opposed. Motion carried. Okay. With that, I would like to entertain a motion to continue this public hearing to November 5th.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Motion carries. Okay. We had a second item on the agenda, but due to the fact that our last regular monthly meeting was delayed a week, we did not get to have the two notices in the Department News, so we cannot open that public hearing. Can I have the motion to adjourn? Thank you. Wait. Go ahead, Gary.
At our regular scheduled meeting, we had a long discussion about the process of the zoning enforcement officer and the fact that it would keep us in the loop. It's been almost, I think, 2 weeks. I don't believe I've received a single email.
Actually, you have.
What was the email?
Well, I don't know if you actually picked up your emails, but I did send them, so,
I don't have it.
so that's not
You
one
wanna-
now. I would like a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Can I make sure that you have my email about?
I sent it to the town email. I think you have it.
I don't have it.
Yes, you do.